So you'll never guess who's been caught spying on the US. Oh, wait. You will. It's Israel.
No way!
Citing 2 current U.S. officials and 1 former U.S. official, NBC reported that the Defense Intelligence Agency recently raised Israel's counterintelligence threat assessment to a critical level.
Yes, that Israel has been caught spying on the US is no great reveal to anyone who's been paying attention, but that certain Pentagon sources are actually revealing this Israeli spying is something of a reveal because, of course, Israel's pervasive spying on Uncle Sam is one of those things that everyone knows but no one is supposed to say. So perhaps that's exactly why the White House, as well as the Israeli government, have immediately come out to deny any such reports.
We have this Pentagon, this report, first in NBC, now in New York Times, the Pentagon saying that Israel may be spying on the U.S. The Israeli embassy to the U.S. is denying it, saying Israel does not gather intelligence on American entities, let alone U.S. government officials. Israel intelligence collection efforts are aimed at its enemies, not its allies. The White House also pushing back, saying this entire story is false and sourced to someone who doesn't have any knowledge of what's going on.
And in other news, foxes deny anything to do with the recent raid on the henhouse. Yes, what else would you expect? But do you know the full context of this story? Do you know the documented history of decades of illegal Israeli government spying on Washington? Do you know who was involved in the nuclear smuggling ring that stole America's nuclear secrets to build Israel's illegal and still undeclared nuclear arsenal? Do you know about Unit 8200 and the inescapable web of cyber spying operations that leads from Tel Aviv to Washington right through Epstein Island? Well, you're about to. Strap in and get ready. This is the Corbett Report.
You're listening to the Corbett Report. CorbettReport.com.
Welcome back, friends. Welcome back to another edition of the Corbett Report. I'm your host, James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, coming to you, as always, from the sunny climes of Western Japan here in June of 2026 with episode 503 of the Corbett Report podcast, Israel Caught Spying on the U.S. Yes, let's get into the details of this latest story, and we can do so by going to the source of this scandal, our friends at the good old gray prostitute, the New York Times, which reported just a few days ago on Pentagon sees growing espionage threat from Israel, in which they note that recent U.S. intelligence reports have raised concerns about Israeli spy agencies eavesdropping on American negotiators working on a peace deal with Iran. The reports include concerns that Israel has stepped up its efforts to eavesdrop on senior American officials, including Steve Witkoff, President Trump's top negotiator, and another report written by the Defense Intelligence Agency and other military intelligence offices and focused on earlier events going back several years, said that the counterintelligence threat level posed by Israel has been increased in recent weeks to the top level from high to critical. And it apparently outlines various efforts by Israel to spy on American military personnel and government officials. And then they get into the meat and potatoes. Why? Why do we care about this? Well, of course, because it could interfere with the precious Iran war. The new warning could potentially complicate efforts to further integrate military war planning between U.S. Central Command and Israel, especially if the Pentagon makes a decision to place new restrictions on information shared with Israeli officers. So this is a report that, although it seems almost a formality, again, this is the open secret that everyone knows, though no one is supposed to acknowledge. Well, once it has been acknowledged and once official threat levels are officially raised from high to critical, that seems like it would warrant a little bit more precaution and precaution when it comes to such things as military war planning, wouldn't it? And so this is something that is potentially disruptive to the relations that obviously pertain in the Middle East, which is precisely why it was immediately denied by both parties, as one would expect. This New York Times report interestingly notes that the DIA report was drafted after incidents in which American defense personnel in Israel detected that software to tap their communications had been surreptitiously installed on their phones, something that we'll get into later. But, of course, a White House official speaking on the condition that their name not be used said that the account was false. A spokesperson for the Israeli embassy in Washington also disputed claims that Israel poses a counterintelligence threat, saying that Israel does not spy on American officials or entities. What else would you expect? But just in case you did expect anything else, you have it doubly confirmed by the crack repeaters over at NBC News. Pentagon raised threat of Israeli spying on U.S. to highest level, sources say, talking about that New York Times report, but then following up with an official denial. A spokesperson for the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. said in a statement that it is completely false that Israel spies on the U.S. Israel does not gather intelligence on American entities, let alone U.S. government officials, the spokesperson said. Israel intelligence collection efforts are aimed at its enemies, not its allies. Any claims to the contrary are either misinformed or politically motivated. Yes, of course. So, no surprise at all that it's immediately denied by all parties, and no surprise at all that the usual Israeli firsters in the establishment-controlled press in the United States have been wheeled out to wield their strong objections to this obviously politically motivated scare story that has no basis in reality.
What am I hearing about it? It is total BS. It's another anti-Israel story, planted in a major media organization, put forward to help divide the two of the good guys, the U.S. and Israel. The problem in this whole thing is Iran. When it comes to Israel, I was in touch with some of the highest level of our intelligence apparatus. They say this is a dumb story. It is well known that we do the same exact thing with France, with Britain, and Israel. We are known to share intelligence and also monitor each other. This is just another example of people going out of their way to try to create a divide between us and Israel. And it does not exist.
Now, I'm tempted to say, how do you know when a Zionist stooge like Brian Kilmeade is lying? His lips are moving. But more charitably, I would just ask people to observe the fact that when the intelligence agencies come out with a report involving some vast conspiracy fantasy about Russians puppeteering the entire U.S. government, the repeaters of the mainstream press ask us to just trust them, bro. They know what they're doing. The intelligence agencies came to this conclusion. How could you possibly say otherwise? But when it involves, say, the intelligence agencies raising a critical alarm about Israeli spying on the U.S., what total wide-eyed nonsense is this? How could you possibly believe that garbage? It's obviously politically motivated, and we are expected to dismiss it. So isn't it interesting, the double standard that pertains, but not particularly surprising? Anyway, as I say, anyone with their head screwed on straight, or anyone with eyes to see, will know about this well-documented phenomenon of Israeli spying on the U.S. government and U.S. officials. A phenomenon that goes back many, many decades and has been voluminously documented by many sources, including the Corbett Report. In fact, you might remember a report back in 2012 in which I outlined the extensive spy networks that Israel has been using to gain access to sensitive information in America for their blackmailing and covert influence operations. And this is something that I've been talking about on the Corbett Report for, documentably, a decade and a half. Perhaps the best-known case of Israeli spying in the U.S. is that of Jonathan Pollard. A civilian analyst in Navy intelligence, Pollard had access to thousands of secret documents that he passed to Israel. Until 1998, Israel denied that it had any direct contact with Pollard, but in May of that year, Benjamin Netanyahu admitted that Pollard was an intelligence source who was being handled by the Israeli Bureau for Scientific Relations. Since then, the Israeli government has lobbied extensively for him to be released from prison in North Carolina, where he is currently serving a life sentence with an expected release date of 2015. Far more than Pollard, though, Israeli spying spans a number of decades and goes to the heart of the most sensitive data and material in the American government. In the late 1960s, Zalman Shapiro, a prominent member of the Zionist Organization of America, was placed under investigation for passing highly enriched uranium to Israel. Shapiro founded the nuclear fuel plant at Apollo, Pennsylvania, and enough uranium was believed to have been smuggled from the plant to create Israel's first dozen nuclear bombs. The CIA Tel Aviv station chief has said that the plant was an Israeli operation from the beginning, but all FOIA requests for the extensive CIA files on the operation are being rejected, presumably because it would mean the US would have to give up its long-held policy of nuclear ambiguity and admit the fact that Israel has nuclear weapons. In 1985, Richard Kelly Smith, a physicist and businessman who had contracted with NATO and NASA, was arrested for illegally passing 15 shipments of nuclear triggering devices to the Israeli government via an Israeli trading company. He was sentenced to 40 months in prison, but was immediately eligible for parole because he was 72 years old at the time of his sentencing. In 1993, a massive ADL-led spying operation was busted targeting numerous institutions and individuals, including the NAACP and even the San Francisco police. The data was being passed to Israel and in some cases South Africa. The city dropped criminal prosecution of the case after lobbying from local Jewish organizations, but the ADL was forced to settle a civil lawsuit out of court for an undisclosed sum. In 1996, it was revealed that the Office of Naval Intelligence had confirmed that U.S. technology has been acquired by China through Israel in the form of the Lavi fighter and possibly SAM surface-to-air missile technology. According to the report, this technology transfer represents a dramatic step forward for Chinese military aviation. There are many such stories of spying and espionage relating to Israel, but by far the most revealing center around 9/11. The so-called dancing Israelis were not only promptly allowed to leave the US without charges, they were even featured on Israeli television as folk heroes who talked openly about how they had been sent to America specifically to document the 9/11 attacks.
And at that point we were taken for another round of questioning, this time related to our allegedly being members of Mossad. The fact of the matter is we are coming from a country that experiences terror daily. Our purpose was to document the event.
In an even more explosive series of reports for Fox News, reporter Carl Cameron began a series of reports detailing an ongoing and extensive investigation into Israeli persons of interest in the 9/11 case. The report detailed striking facts about how two Israeli-owned companies were suspected of supplying Israeli intelligence with vast streams of data about the American phone systems, as well as providing Israeli agents with warnings when they were under investigation by U.S. authorities.
The company is Comverse Infosys, a subsidiary of an Israeli-run private telecommunications firm with offices throughout the U.S. It provides wiretapping equipment for law enforcement.
That was a short clip from my extensive 2012 report on Israeli spying in the U.S., A Brief History, and I hope that you will follow the link from the show notes in today's episode, corbettreport.com/Israel spying, back to that report so that you can delve into the greater detail and follow the links to the various sources documenting those examples of Israeli spying in the U.S., including that very interesting example that was mentioned there merely in passing about the extensive Israeli and completely illegal Israeli espionage operation to smuggle sensitive nuclear triggering devices out of the U.S. to Israel as part of the Israeli operation to build their completely illegal and undeclared nuclear stockpile. And when you start delving down that rabbit hole, some interesting names come up. Like, for example, who was an important ringleader of that operation? Who was kind of nobody back in the 1960s, but kind of a big name now? Oh, that's right. Benjamin Netanyahu.
In terms of the FBI uncovering a multi-node network, this one happened to be centered in California. Milco was a company that was incorporated in 1972 by a man named Richard Kelly Smythe, who, when he was discovered sending 800 Krytrons, which are dual-use items that could be used to trigger nuclear weapons, when he was discovered doing that, he skipped bail in the mid-1980s and disappeared until he was picked up by Interpol in the early part of 2000. And so the story is interesting and explosive because after multiple attempts at denials, we had a document release in which the key contact, or one of the key contacts that Smythe was meeting with to set up sales in Israel, it was none other than Benjamin Netanyahu. And so the document, which I'm kind of holding up right here for the people who are on video, actually names Benjamin Netanyahu as being an employee of Heli Trading Company, which was the node in Israel that would receive Ministry of Defense requisitions that they would pass on to Milco. And so the interesting thing about this, of course, is the high-profile nature of Benjamin Netanyahu, the fact that the smuggling ringleader has been identified as Arnon Milchan, a person any American knows for his movie productions such as Pretty Woman and other favorites, who is running this and who a recent book has named as being a top economic espionage spy for Lacom, who worked under Benjamin Bloomberg and Raphael Eitan. But the FBI document that we published on July 4 related to an antiwar.com story was really short and direct. And its core focus was on the fact that in a period when Netanyahu was building himself up as a leader in the terrorism industry, hosting major conferences, having just returned from his studies in the United States, hosting major conferences in the Jonathan Netanyahu Terrorism Institute, named after his brother who was killed on the raid on Entebbe. Here's a person who was supposed to be working as a furniture company executive, and yet these documents, which are very credible because of what they were, which is testimony from Richard Kelly Smith after he was returned from his exile overseas and finally forced to serve a prison sentence. These were the statements that he made to FBI agents in the district attorney office when they debriefed him and wanted to know what the extent of the nuclear technology smuggling network was. And boom, there's Benjamin Netanyahu.
Now, perhaps if you're a member of the general public, you didn't know that factoid, but hopefully, if you are a dedicated Corbettier, you would know it, if only because you'd seen it in episode 458 of the Corbett Report podcast on Meet Benjamin Netanyahu, Unconvicted War Criminal. But in case you happen to miss that podcast, I would suggest you go back and refamiliarize yourself with that material. There are some very interesting tidbits about the current Israeli Prime Minister / ex-nuclear trigger smuggling ringleader. And the general activities that he's been involved in for many decades. But beyond that, if you thought that this, again, extensively, voluminously documented phenomenon of Israeli spying on America is an old story, yeah, that happened way back in the past, but that was then, this is now, get with the times, James, then you have not kept up to date with this story. I don't just mean the latest allegations and critical warnings from the Defense Intelligence Agency and others. I mean the now decades-long trail of documented instances of Israeli cyber snooping and telecommunications snooping on Americans and the people of the world generally. That's right. In case you haven't been paying attention to the construction of the ubiquitous digital panopticon in which we all find ourselves ensconced, you will find that hiding under every rock and crouching behind every corner in this field is an Israeli company or an Israeli intelligence operation.
Israel's Celebrite revealed as company helping FBI hack iPhone encryption. This comes, of course, from Zero Hedge in the aftermath of the FBI's surprising request this past Monday to postpone a hearing in its legal crusade to unlock Apple's cell phones. Many wondered who it was that had succeeded in penetrating the supposedly unhackable smartphone. Earlier today, Reuters provided the answer. The FBI's effort is being assisted by Israel's Celebrite, a provider of mobile forensic software, which is now helping the feds in their attempt to unlock an iPhone used by one of the San Bernardino, California shooters. This all reported today by the Yedioth Ahronoth newspaper in Israel. If Celebrite succeeds, then the FBI will no longer need the help of Apple Incorporated, the Israeli Daily said, citing unnamed industry sources. It will also mean that the entire Apple stand for privacy and consumer rights was one big, shocking theatrical spectacle, as both parties involved were clearly aware the iPhone can be penetrated, but all it takes are the right tools, and wouldn't you know it, those right tools have been found in Israel.
With the click of a button, you can bring down nations to their knees very rapidly, if you so desire, and if you're willing to take the risks, because every system can be hacked.
Israel manufactures Pegasus, some of the most advanced spyware in the world. It first came to attention in 2016. Since then, various governments have bought the spyware for their own use. Questions today are, how does Pegasus work? Who is using it? And who are its victims?
Expose Samsung phones embedded with unremovable Israeli spyware. Huh? Come on. Could this really be real? Social Media Exchange, SMEX, a nonprofit digital human rights organization focusing on the West Asia, North Africa region, has warned people living in these regions that an effective spyware app developed by an Israeli firm is quietly embedded in Samsung smartphones across the region and poses a serious surveillance threat.
Wow.
SMEX has written publicly to Samsung complaining that its A and M series mid-range handsets either come with the Aura app already installed or installs it automatically through system updates without user consent and demanding it end the practice. I wonder if it blows up, just like all those Israeli pagers blew up. Wonder if they could make it blow up if they wanted. I wonder.
As you may be starting to surmise, the fact that Israel seems to be behind every cyber spying scandal of recent years is not an accident. It's not a mistake. It's not a fluke. It is part of a coordinated campaign, one that is being run through an institution that you should know about, a military intelligence operation run by the Israelis called Unit 8200, and the ex-members of this unit that are infesting every corner of Silicon Valley and every other cyber surveillance operation of note in the world. And if you don't know about Unit 8200, you should, and you can get more information about it from, stories like this one. One that I penned back in 2021 on the Pegasus scandal, as that one was developing. Beyond Pegasus, the bigger picture of Israeli cyber spying, in which I wrote about how the Pegasus software was developed by Israeli surveillance firm NSO Group, but how NSO Group had some interesting origins. Namely, according to Forbes, the co-founders of the NSO Group, Omri Levi and Shalev Julio, are believed to be alumni of Israel's famous Unit 8200 signals intelligence arm, as are many of the country's security entrepreneurs. And there's some more reporting about the accuracy or potential inaccuracy of those reports of the NSO Group's connections to 8200. But what is Unit 8200? For those who don't know, Unit 8200 is the branch of the Israel Defense Forces responsible for signals intelligence. That is Israel's equivalent of the NSA. Supposedly founded in 1952, or was it in the 1930s? The unit was not officially acknowledged until the early 2000s, when stories of the incredible and incredibly illegal acts of cyber espionage it has perpetrated over the decades began to be publicized. One particularly high-profile piece of work bearing Unit 8200's fingerprints was Stuxnet, the military-grade cyber weapon that specifically targeted Iran's nuclear enrichment facility at Natanz. It has long been known that Stuxnet was co-developed by the United States and Israel, but it was New York Times correspondent David Sanger who revealed that the worm was actually worked on by Unit 8200. But beyond the cyber weapons and still largely classified military exploits of the unit itself, is the undeniable fact that a surprisingly large number of high-profile tech startups and Silicon Valley ventures in recent years have been founded by ex-members of 8200. One such ex-member, Avishai Abrahami, asserted in 2016 that, quote, "There are more than 100 guys from the unit that I personally knew who built startups and sold them for a lot of money," end quote, including a team of 10 who, quote, "created companies where the average market cap is $500 million," end quote. Well, what kind of companies are we talking about? Well, I do list some that don't raise that many people's hackles: Audio Codes and Viber and Argus and Checkpoint, etc. But here are some companies that you might want to know about in more detail. For example, Carbine 911, a tech startup marketed as a next-generation call handling platform for 911 and emergency call centers that, as an in-depth 2019 expose from Narrative revealed, was founded and run by a gaggle of Israeli military and intelligence officials, including a Unit 8200 alumni, and was bankrolled by the likes of Epstein, Ehud Barak, and Peter Thiel, or Converse Infosys, who people might recognize as the aforementioned group that was behind the wiretapping that U.S. law enforcement identified and that Carl Cameron was reporting on in that Fox News report from 2001. There's Cyber Reason, a cybersecurity firm founded by another ex-Unit 8200 member who, as Whitney Webb has extensively reported, ran a doomsday election simulation for the U.S. government and has gained access to the U.S. government's most classified networks. And there's Toka, a spyware firm co-founded by Ehud Barak and headed by the former chief of the Israel Defense Forces cyber staff, which, as Whitney Webb has also extensively reported, is aiming to provide a one-stop hacking shop for governments specializing in IoT, Internet of Things devices. So those are just some of the very interesting companies with extensive 8200 and ex-8200 member ties. And I did get into even more detail about these companies, their connections, and the meaning of this Israeli spying story in a editorial I penned earlier this year, Israeli Spying After Epstein, in which I talked, for example, about that Carbine 911 story that I alluded to in the previous editorial, and I go into more depth and detail, including some of the actual correspondence between Epstein and Thiel and Barak and Suleim and the other investors that were being roped into the Carbine deal that have now been revealed in the Epstein files. So there's a lot of information there. I go into more detail about the 8200 gang and its connections to the cybersecurity world. And I also talk about from honey traps to panopticon, i.e. the future of spying after the Epstein character has been written out of the script. What are they going with now? Of course, it's more related to cyber spying than the old style, actually physically in the room with you type of spying. And I also talk about yet another US-backed Israeli company, Paragon Solutions, which was caught helping the Italian government spy on 3 prominent European journalists. And here's an important part of this story. In a move that will surprise precisely no one, the US government has now doubled down on its reliance on Israeli-produced spyware. In fact, as Reuters reported last month, the Trump administration is actively working to remove sanctions on Israeli spyware-linked executives. And I have a quote in there about that and more information about the US government actively working with, colluding with, and trying to unsanction various Israeli spyware firms for their own purposes. Of course, because of course, the US-Israeli partnership has not been fundamentally fractured here. And despite recent reports from the New York Times and NBC News and others, it is highly unlikely that even this critical threat level of Israeli wiretapping and spying on US government officials is going to fundamentally damage the US-Israel relationship. But then that does raise the question of why this is being reported at all. Because if there's one thing that I think we can safely conclude, it is that nothing that is truly fundamentally damaging to the establishment or its agenda will ever be reported by the likes of the New York Times. So what is really going on here? Well, perhaps we can get a better detail about this and what may or may not be happening behind closed doors from more suspicious reporting from another establishment promoting source, Axios, which I'm sure you saw in the past week or so, had this story about a purported phone call between Trump and Netanyahu about Israel's ongoing operations in Lebanon, in which Trump supposedly completely unloaded on his rival? Bibi Netanyahu.
And supposedly Barak Ravid of Axios, and then Mark, I think Caputo, also of Axios, penned this piece. What the F are you doing? Supposedly Trump told Netanyahu. Wyatt Reed corrected me of Gray Zone, and he did the history going back years, 2021. This is Barack Ravid in 2021. Trump blasts Netanyahu for disloyalty. F him. Okay, that was 2021. Here we are 5 years later. What the F are you doing? Trump blasts Netanyahu. It's so totally fake. And then he goes on, 2023, Biden frustrated with Bibi. 2024, Biden writing out of patience with Bibi. 2024 again, Trump angry with Bibi. It's total World Wrestling Federation. I think here's my meme. Trump at the WWF. Totally fake. So your thoughts on some of the Trump shenanigans?
Yeah, same as you. I think if people are genuinely taking this news that there's rivalry between the two as seriously and legitimate, it's like, I don't know. That person's not high up on the discernment gauge.
That was a short clip from the most recent edition of the Cognitive Dissidence podcast. If people are unaware of that podcast or are not following it, I suggest you do so, and I'll leave the link to that particular episode in the show notes where you can find out more about that story and the other stories that the crew are reporting on there. But yes, I very much agree with their take on this Axios report. It smacks of World Wrestling Entertainment level kayfabe to me that this is not a genuine rift between Trump and Netanyahu. This is performative and is being reported for the benefit of the hoi polloi, who are obviously meant to take a certain narrative out of it. Oh, look, Trump is really slamming Netanyahu over this. The only question is why? What specifically does the establishment have to gain from these reports? And there are a number of possibilities that present themselves. So let's look at this in the context of this. Oh my God, can you believe Israel is spying on the US? Says the establishment media. Why are they saying this? Well, potentially it, at the very least, provides a convenient out for MAGA with regards to the Iran war. Because obviously these inside Pentagon sources who are leaking this information to the New York Times and etc., that is coming from people within the administration who presumably are leaving a convenient rug that can be pulled out as needed from the Operation Epic Fury narrative at any time. Specifically, if and when and as the American public truly starts to put actual pressure on this administration to bring this nonsense to an end, the MAGA will be able to say, look, guys, it was Israel. They tricked us. They were spying on us. They were doing all these operations behind the scenes. They tricked us into this Iran war, I tell ya. And they will be able to rug pull their way out of it. And hey, don't worry, guys. If you vote harder for Trump and the Republicans in the midterms, then boy, Trump is sure going to put those damn Israelis in their place. Honest, guys. Make America great again. That is at least one of the potential ways in which this scandal can be used by the establishment to further their agenda. There are other interesting possibilities that present themselves. For example, in that Beyond Pegasus editorial that I was talking about earlier, I talked about why the Pegasus scandal was gaining so much attention in the establishment press at that time, several years ago, when at this point, I would say everyone who's paying attention to the news has at least heard of Pegasus and the Israeli spying scandal that was happening. Why? Well, in that editorial, I posited, in this case, I believe it's more likely that the powers that shouldn't be are throwing the NSO group and its Pegasus software under the bus for the sake of protecting the larger Israeli military cyber warfare industry, not undermining it. After all, the NSO group has been in the crosshairs of cyber privacy activists for years, with even the all-powerful Blackstone group having to back out of a deal to acquire a 40% stake in the company after it was revealed that Pegasus had been used by the Mexican government to spy on its own citizens. The NSO group is already tainted. By exposing this story about the company, one that was already known and reported, they are able to take attention away from the Cyber Reasons, Tokas, and other companies that are performing similar functions for the Unit 8200 infested cybersecurity industry under much deeper cover. So there can always be an aspect of throwing a limited hangout out there to distract from the larger picture, the one that we're starting to assemble in reports like this one. Can you believe Israel has been caught spying on the U.S., but luckily the Defense Intelligence Agency caught onto it, guys. They raised their threat level from Israel to critical, and now everything's taken care of. Go back to sleep. Everything's okay. It certainly could be, at the very least, one of those types of cover-up operations or cleanup operations. Perhaps, maybe there was even an actual, real, honest-to-God whistleblower who really did expose a real story. Even so, they can come along, say that, don't worry, the Defense Intelligence Agency and the other fine folks of the intelligence community are on the case, and they've got you covered, guys. It's the first and only time that we've ever heard of anything like this, and it'll be the last time. Don't worry. So that could be one aspect of what's going on here. There could be even greater, grander geopolitical machinations that are happening here with regard to the changeover of world order into the new, shiny, multipolar world order that we're being stewarded into. And is there a plan, an ultimately larger plan, to throw Israel and the Zionists under the bus at some point for the purposes of this grander world order agenda? And it is something that I am certainly noticing, that where it was absolutely, completely forbidden to even mention criticism of Israel in the establishment press, even half a decade ago, even a decade ago, it has become more and more common. And as a result, we see that even the majority of Americans are now starting to question the relationship of the U.S. to Israel. This is an incredible shift in opinion that is taking place over the past few years. Obviously, it is related to the very obvious genocide and war crimes being committed by the Zionists and obviously perpetrated by Netanyahu's government in Israel. And so there is obvious, I mean, of course, the public will be outraged when such things are publicized. But again, why are these things being publicized now? In previous eras, similarly egregious genocides and war crimes have been waged against the Palestinian people and Israel's neighbors in the name of the Greater Israel Project. But you would not hear a peep out of the establishment about that. Now you are starting to hear about it. So is there a larger geopolitical transformation that is being perpetrated here? Yes, Greater Israel, Zionists, you guys go. We've got your backs. And then the rug pull, and then it turns into another version of the old Cold War era Middle East, divided up between previously the Soviets and the US, and in the 21st century multipolar version, it's going to be Washington and Beijing, and they're going to be competing for influence in the arena in the Middle East. And it is interesting to see the way that China is starting to work its way diplomatically into the Iran crisis and how that's being calculated, etc. So is there part of a larger geopolitical machination that is happening here? Again, I think there are a number of different ways that we can read this, at least tiny little bit of a peek under the cover of the larger picture of Israeli cyber spying and spying generally on the United States and, of course, the people of the world. But one thing I think it's safe to say is that you are not going to read this bigger picture with all of the context and the clues and all of these different pieces of the puzzle in the New York Times or Axios or NBC or any of the other establishment media outlets. So let us use this opportunity to present this information to a greater public. Because as I say, if you've been paying attention, if you have your head screwed on straight, none of what I've presented today should be a gigantic shock to your system. But I guarantee it'll be a shock to the system of people in your life who do not know about this information, who are hearing for the first time about Cyber Reason and Toka and the Pegasus software scandal and other such things, let alone Converse Infosys, let alone nuclear smuggling being perpetrated by the likes of Benjamin Netanyahu for Israel's illegal undeclared nuclear program, etc. There's a lot of information here that I hope you will use. This is a resource. Please make use of it. Once again, all of the links to all of the sources, documents, articles, videos that I cite today will be in the transcript, the hyperlinked transcript for today's episode at corbettreport.com/Israel spying. Please make use of that as a resource for your own research, and please help spread this information to others. And if you want to get in on the question of why is this limited hangout being dangled before the public right now. If you have your own speculation, I'd be interested to hear it. So as always, Corbett Report members are invited to log into the Corbett Report website and leave your comments at corbettreport.com/Israel spying. But we're going to leave today's exploration there for today. This is James Corbett of corbettreport.com, thanking you for investing your mind time in today's exploration. I'm looking forward to talking to you again in the near future. The Corbett Report is 100% listener supported. Join the Corbett Report community to become a member and log into corbettreport.com to read the subscriber newsletter featuring my weekly editorial, recommended reading and viewing, discounts on Corbett Report merchandise, and once a month, a subscriber-exclusive video. Sign up today at corbettreport.com/members and help support this independent media.